Hello, my name's Niranjan, the host of Master of Your Crafts podcast, learning from leaders who are continuously inspired, passionate, and driven to align with their soul purpose, sharing their gifts to bring healing to others. The music is composed by Rebecca Everett. Today is episode number 87, and I'll be talking to Nancy Napier, a distinguished professor emerita at Boise State University in the USA. Nancy has published widely on organizational creativity, innovation, and emerging economics over the years. Because life is not just research and teaching, Nancy reached out to leaders and managers in other formats. She co-created and hosted her local NPR affiliate, Idaho Business Matters, was a regular guest on KTVB Channel 7 Noon News, wrote for Forbes Vietnam, and continues to write blogs for psychologytoday.com and Idaho Statesman. In the last few years, she has received 2 of Vietnam's top honors for foreigners: the Medal for Honor for contributing to the advancement of education in the country, and the Medal for Friendship for helping to build relationships between the USA and Vietnam. After 35 years in the academic and research world, Nancy has embarked on something completely new: fiction writing, which offers her the joy and challenges of being a beginner once again. Hello and welcome to Nancy. How are you, Nancy?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm doing well. The weather's getting cooler here, but it's the season of change. That's one thing that we can't control.
That's right. We have had a terribly, terribly hot summer, so I feel we've earned these beautiful days, and as the leaves change, I love it.
It's going to be an interesting little time ahead, that's for sure. That's for sure. I'm curious to get further into a conversation about some of the mastered skills that you have developed and enhanced throughout your life experiences, not only in the US, but also in Vietnam, and the draw and the attention and the drive that took you there from the get-go. Would you be open to sharing a little bit about what that looked like for you?
Well, it was a long time ago, 25 plus years ago, and I credit Canada. I was there, met a woman who was running a project in Hanoi. She was originally from Montreal and moved to Asia and has lived there for 35 years or so. But I went there for 3 weeks to deliver a training program to professors at a major university in Hanoi who were trying to learn how to do business with the non-Soviet world. So we were teaching them Western business practices. And that 3 weeks, by serendipity, opportunity, entrepreneur thinking on all our parts, that turned into a 9-year-long aid project, capacity building project to help establish the first international standard business school at the university there, National Economics University. And I worked with my Canadian colleague and friend for most of those years. She now lives in Bangkok, but it was a new venture startup, is the way I describe it to people who don't know anything about Vietnam, because it truly was. We delivered our Masters of Business program 3 times, so for 80 some people, so instructors and business people throughout the country, and then helped them create curriculum, research, financial systems, IT systems, all that goes into creating a business school. And I fell in love with the people and the place, and I've continued to go back doing research there with a fair number of people. I taught for that business school that I helped to set up. And now we have at my university an executive master's of business administration program. And we take those executives for a week's residency every year. And so I just returned from that. First time we've been there since October 19. And it was phenomenal I get to fall in love with the country and the people all over again when I see it through fresh eyes. So it's a lifelong love. It's like my second home, frankly. So
what a beautiful story, and what a beautiful witness of experiences for such, like you said, loving relationship, not only with the country, but with the people too.
yes, it's been wonderful. The last book I did with my co-author is from Vietnam, was a series of profiles of some of these people that I've known, worked with over the last 25 years. And it looks at their lives. They were born and grew up as children during the American War. Mm-hmm. And then they lived through a terrible 15 plus years of rationing and famine and great difficulty called the subsidy period. And now many of them are leaders in education, business, and government in Vietnam. And so this was a chance, the book, and then we did a documentary out of that to say thank you, I guess, for these people letting us into their lives a little bit and talk about some periods that they really don't. And so that, again, I just feel so incredibly lucky, privileged, fortunate to be able to know these folks and now to highlight some of them.
And what a blessing for them, as well as for you, to be able to share that, and amplify it, not only, like you said, through a book, but also through a documentary, through many different mediums, to educating the Western world of perhaps how privileged we really are and how naive we are in the experiences that we have of a beautiful country like Vietnam had witnessed.
Exactly. And that was my hope with this book, is that for North Americans and particularly Americans and Vietnamese to understand each other a little better, for many Americans of all ages, I thought. What I learned was this turned into a chance for the generations in Vietnam to come to understand each other a little bit better. On some of the interviews, I took a young woman with me who she was at McGill, Canada Connection again,
yes,
and had done an internship and was home for about 3 weeks in the summer. She came with me a couple of times, and one of the interviewees was a university colleague and friend of her mother's. And this woman talked about their lives in Crimea when they were in university and young women back in Vietnam and the difficulties. And so this young woman said, "Oh my gosh, I apologize for my generation. I never asked my parents. I never listened. They didn't say much about that time frame." And she said, "But I now want to find out more." So she went home that night and talked with her father. And she said, "I really listened that time." So the book has become a bridge. We call that group of people the bridge generation, because they've gone from a terrible period of poverty to a country that's growing very quickly. So it bridges Americans and Vietnamese. It also now bridges generations, which we hadn't expected. And one final bridge, again, that I hadn't expected. My focus for the last 2 decades has been on Hanoi and people who live in the North. At least in the American film world and books, there's been a whole lot written about what happened in the Vietnam War to refugees, to soldiers, and there's not much about what happened to the people in the North. And so one of the interviewees said his family split during that time. Some stayed in the North, some went to the South. And he said, this might be a way to help the North and the South also understand what they went through, because the experiences of war were quite different in both places. So so the notion of a bridge, again, I just feel incredibly lucky to be able to be part of that. It's been a good experience.
And what a beautiful opportunity to call it a bridge and to have the context of it come through from what you've witnessed. But no doubt there are subconscious bridges that are being built. So while you're aware of the North and the South, I'm sure there are many individuals who have taken that example and perhaps said, well, how can I bridge that in my country, with my heritage, with my background? I'm originally from England, but my heritage is from India. So potentially, I could take the same principles and mechanisms and tools and have that amplified and reflected in my own life. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it is about connecting individuals with their lineage and building deeper connections with those who are around us in our own sphere. Be it a book, a movie, a documentary that will do that, or a conversation like this could potentially facilitate in that. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, from my perspective, it is all about the relationship we have and this unique moment of time that bonds that experience, I think, is the true gift.
Oh, well put. Absolutely beautiful. Yeah, exactly that. And one of the takeaways, again, as I mentioned, the generations, we don't study history enough in this country, I think. And we don't even study the history that's in our own backyards, our parents, our grandparents. And so the questions that my parents are no longer here, but now there are so many questions I would have asked if I thought about it a little bit more. So I'm hoping, as you're saying, those connections across heritage, within families, across cultures is so incredibly important to do. And to be able to play a small role in that has been wonderful. So you're right.
And I'm sure what you've seeded will amplify and be rippled out there into the world. From my own experiences, and perhaps what you have witnessed in your own experiences through this journey, there often needs to be an outsider to come in to assist the facilitation of that conversation. For instance, the woman that you had met in Montreal who had talked about Vietnam, to be able for this journey to continue for you on your leg of life. I feel that is often a pivotal piece that we miss in our own lives, because having those courageous conversations with our own parents, siblings, and our own history and ancestry can be a little bit more, why are you asking those questions of me, daughter, sister, sibling, uncle? Whereas if we can bring in an example saying, well, Nancy wrote a book and this is her experience. What do you think? How can we enrich our lives and perhaps give that as a greater opportunity and a greater meaning for not only the wiser one, if you will, but also the one who's willing to receive and bear witness of it.
And I think, again, I think that's a great point. It's absolutely true. I think as a trusted outsider, I could ask questions of these people, and they were willing to talk about something they don't normally talk about. And I treated it with as much respect as I possibly could, of course. And they read everything I wrote and signed off on it. And I think in the end, they could use that outside book to bring up those conversations. But you also make a really good point about we have to be ready to receive it. And so that's why this experience with the daughter of my co-author, she wasn't ready to receive anything until she heard someone other than her mother talking about things. And so I think that's a big part of being open to it. I've been so fortunate, again, to be involved in a project like this over the years, but it was also because I think of myself as an academic entrepreneur. I've seen these opportunities and been able and willing to take them. And so that, let's try it. What can happen if something goes wrong? attitude has really served me well. And so I've been able to do all kinds of different things that I maybe wouldn't have just because of that openness that I learned a long time ago. So it's important. Be ready to receive.
Absolutely. And how enriching is that for you, coming from such an entrenched, if I can say, academic background? Granted, there's critical thinking and there's different types of personalities and perspectives that are shared in the realm of academia, but having it come into fruition into real life stories, how glorifying is that for you?
It's absolutely wonderful. I have been, you realize things when you look back on them. My academic career, so much of my research has always tried to bridge, and I hadn't thought about it exactly that way until a few years back, but bridge different disciplines. So the notion of looking at my world has been business leadership practices, but to look at them in a variety of settings. So, for example, 15 years ago, I stumbled on and then pursued it, looking at how organizations develop and use creativity. And I looked at our university's football program, and I'm not a sports person. I looked at a jail. I looked at a software company. I looked at a theater company and a healthcare information firm. And so I thought, okay, can't have anything more different than software and theater. And yet the way they pursued looking at creativity, there was so much overlap, and the way they thought about their leaders thought about what they were doing. So that led to looking across these disciplines in high performing and highly creative organizations. And so it's not a profound idea, and yet we don't do it in academics enough to say, okay, what could we learn from a dance group or a jail about leadership and about culture and those sorts of things. So that notion of looking beyond a single discipline, my attention span isn't long enough to stay in one place. So that's part of it. But again, bridging across different types of ideas and different fields has been a hallmark of what I've tried to do. And I've been at a university that has supported that. So I've been very pleased to be in a place that nobody's ever heard of, maybe a little bit more now, but I went from a very well-known university, getting my PhD and also teaching, and then landed here for a year and have stayed in part because the culture has allowed me to be really entrepreneurial in the academic side, in research side, and then reaching out to organizations in the community and drawing on them for research. So it's been a good bridge all the way around.
Yes. And what a gift. What a gift.
Very much so.
With all that you know and all that you've experienced, what do you believe about yourself now? And do you feel it defines who Nancy is today?
Good question. I think I see myself as I said earlier, an academic entrepreneur, which to me means I can pursue new ideas, whether that's building an academic program or a new area of research for me that may be sort of new for the field, and to be willing to take risks. I never thought of myself as a risk taker until, again, I started looking backwards, and I realized going to Vietnam for 3 weeks and then this project turning into something that lasted as long as it did, that was a risk. Professionally, personally, I had little kids at the time, not too little, but they spent some time in Vietnam with me. My husband and I were just talking about it last night. Yesterday was one of our son's birthdays. And we said, we put them through lots of experiences living abroad. We spoke German as they were growing up. And so you never know when you take that, those were all risks. And I didn't think of them that way, but that I think has come to define me, that what can go wrong? I'm not in a business or in a field where someone will die as a result of anything I do. So if you take that off the table, then I can take risks intellectually, take risks personally, and see what happens. So
Yeah. Perhaps less pressure from the context that you put it in terms of life or death. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
what do you believe is perhaps one of your callings here to master the skill sets and the experiences that you've witnessed in this life?
I do a lot of executive coaching. I was talking with someone yesterday about that. And I think for me, it has been, can I help develop other people around me? They may be younger students, they may be peers, and I don't think about it that it's my job or my calling to develop someone, but for someone to feel like their world is a little bit better as a result of a conversation or an act. And so it's really been looking outside of myself more. I had some great models watching people do that, family members and others over the years. And I think that just, for me at least, it gives me so much more satisfaction, which sounds very selfish, but is a way to make my world a little bit tiny bit better, and that I can enjoy it and have fun. I mentioned to you that I am trying to be a fiction writer.
Yes.
I'm also trying to learn tennis. I have a family of outstanding tennis players, and they used to say, "Mom, you need to learn how to play tennis." So every 15 years, I would take 2 days of lessons and say, "No, I'm a better cheerleader. I'm better watching you all." But I started that about a year ago, and I'm starting this. My COVID project, pandemic project, was to try and write fiction. So that has put me back in the mode of being a beginner in both of these settings. I am a total beginner, and it's I think helped my teaching. So I of course I'm teaching very intelligent, accomplished executives, but I'm talking about something that's new to them. So it helps me remember they are beginners in a different way. And so to constantly be a beginner, which I've done with research topics over the years, but to do it in a physical way, I'm not a sports person, and also to do it in terms of writing in a completely different way for me, that keeps me going right now. And so not that there's any payoff to other people other than maybe my teaching methods and approaches, but that has been a real joy, to be honest. Frustrating like crazy, but on the other hand, a real joy to get to learn something new in both areas. So that's it's been fun.
And that's a courageous story, even going there, because as we build tenure and we build experiences in life, we're like, no, I'm going to stick to what I know, because going what could feel like backward can be pretty disabling and unsettle a whole bunch of roots that we've kind of spent a lifetime building. So it's a courageous task going to the beginner of a different line, if you will.
Well, and so it's counter to your notion of mastery, maybe. Yeah. And so I had a aha moment recently on the tennis. I had pulled a hamstring, and I just felt like I really was not making any progress. So I went back to a clinic where it was really beginners. And I thought, oh, let me deliberately do that so that I can go back and remind myself that I have come a little bit. Same thing with writing. I was stuck in this fiction a few weeks ago, and I thought, oh, I'll never make any progress. And then I thought, I know how to write short news columns and short blogs and nonfiction that is a little more interesting to read than an academic journal. So I went back to some of that, and I thought maybe there is a purposeful going backwards. You know, we talk about 2 steps forward, 1 back, but that's always struck me as kind of an accident. We don't want to do that. But in this case, I thought, you know, if I'm intentional about backing up a little bit and taking a breath and seeing that, well, no, you have made more progress than you thought, that was huge. And so, but I'm certainly not a master in any of those. And so anyway, so it's an anti-mastery mastering something new.
Well, I'm going to challenge you on that a little bit in terms of it's the perspective. So perhaps the mastery is to recognize when to either take a step back, or I'm going to say lateral, when to look at it on a parallel level, because the step back really isn't happening in the mastered skill. Because you've mastered it, you know when to take a step back in another skill set, in another modality, if you will. So the skills of mastery to me are really loud and very clear, that allow for you to take a step back in your parallel, newly developing skill set.
I like that. That's very good. Yeah. And so a lateral step makes a lot of sense to me as well. That's
Yes.
good sense.
Yes.
All right. I'll let you have that one.
Good
point.
Thank you. What do you feel is some of the attributes that connect you to this purpose of wanting to share stories, real life stories or fiction stories, that has really put you in the space of where you are right now?
I think it's always to help people understand something. So I've written 4 really bad novels. I'm trying to improve a couple of them, so maybe they'll go somewhere. But the first one, again, this is early days of the pandemic, took place in Vietnam. And so one of my driving goals is to help people understand Vietnam in a way beyond it's an exotic place to visit. It has great food. I would want very much to help people understand Vietnam in a different way. And so that's partly this profiles book that we wrote. And one of the bad novels that I'm hoping it'll get better is it's about art crime in Vietnam. I don't know anything about art crime and forgeries and so forth. So it's given me an excuse to learn about that, but also to have the main character who's from Vietnam. She explains culture and the people a little bit so that maybe others can learn about that. So it's certainly, when it comes to Vietnam, that's what drives me, is to how can I help people understand the people and the place in a deeper way. And so writing fiction is an alternative. I've written a couple of books about Vietnam and a whole lot of articles. But again, probably the readership in the academic world, there's a statistic that floats around, who knows if it's true, but that the average number of people who read an academic journal is 6. And when I saw that, I thought, well, that's not getting me anywhere. So, so maybe these avenues of writing or talking. I've got a talk about the book coming up here to an audience locally here of probably baby boomer types. And their image of Vietnam is, one person said, Saigon is an occupied city. And I thought, oh no, we need to talk about that. So again, another way to try and help people learn about, I hope it's not in a preachy way, but to learn about Vietnam and its people in a different way than just war from our perspective, or, oh, I love to travel there because the food is so great. It is great, but I'd like to pass on some other ideas about it. So
what do you think the notion of all that truly is? I ask that based on, have we become a society? Have we become individuals that just want to touch experiences at arm's length, the sights, a little bit of the people, the food, the visual appeals, the souvenirs, rather than getting truly enriched and engrossed in the experience of the country, the city, the town, the village? So be it Vietnam or be it other places around the world, has the Western world been set up that way?
That's a leading question. It's a good one. We probably have, and all the normal things we read and talk about, I'm sure, have contributed to it, that we can access Vietnam you and I can do that right now on our phones and see pictures and all that. And so it does hold us at a distance. Um, you know, and I think that I can fault myself in some ways that I have, in my academic life, changed research topics about every 7 years. And so I go through this real fast learning curve to come up to speed on whatever the topic is that I want to learn about and write about. But then I move on. And I don't know if that's boredom. Well, I'll tell you what it is, frankly, in the academic world. I can start topic areas. Years and years ago, a colleague and I looked at women working abroad, professional women working abroad. There was a very well-known, still is, professor at McGill who did early work on that. And then my friend and I picked it up. But once that topic, and every one of them I've done, once they pick up speed and people start to study them in depth, I can't compete. So I'm better at kind of clearing the brush and saying, well, here's something that we haven't looked at. And then I work on it for 5 to 7 years and then move on to something else. So with Vietnam, at least, that has been a great example to me of trying to become a little bit of a master. And yet, every time I think I get somewhere, there's a new facet that I realize I'm a baby. I'm starting back over. But yeah, I think you're onto something, that we distance ourselves often too much, not just from experiences in traveling, but from people. So you think about how many deep relationships you have and what it takes to do that, the time and effort. It's hard. So now when I return to Vietnam, there are people there who have known me for 25 years. And I heard from one of them this morning about helping a child, one of his friend's children was trying to get into the university. And so we have that long relationship because I've shown up and they've shown up. And so there are not many situations where many of us are able to do that, perhaps.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what an experience. And as you share that piece, my brain is going to the place of, while you reference the 7-year cycle of looking for something new and for that to gain traction, and this element of competition of once it's gained traction, you can't compete. Where did the notion that I have to compete possibly even come from, especially from the place of mastering a skill set, coming in with a depth of knowledge, coming in from a place of awareness and open and receptivity? How did we all get set up to compete? I've witnessed it in my own life. I start a topic and I go in it, and then somebody runs with it, and I'm like, okay, that's great, but I'm so far removed from it. There's little reference. How does that work for you?
The academic world, as you probably know, has this phrase called publish or perish. And so you must publish in certain types of journals in a certain period of time. And so what I found was that the journals that I really admire and wanted to publish in, they would take some of the conceptual stuff that I'm doing. But when it got down to the hardcore quantitative analysis, that's not a strength, and I'm not as interested. So that's where the academic competition piece came from. But I agree with you. I've seen in other parts of life, you move down one direction and then someone steps in and either can do it better, faster, and you think, okay, do I work harder to be able to stay in the game there, or do I say, well, what am I uniquely better at than other people? And that's when I had to give a talk many years ago to a bunch of PhD students at another university about my career. And I don't often think about it. But again, looking back at the topics, at the way things unfolded, that's where this notion of being an academic entrepreneur came up, that early on I can get out there and open up questions. I'm better at asking questions than finding an answer in an academic way. And so I can compete doing that. and it feels good if you can do
Yes.
something well, as you know. I mean,
Yes.
this is your specialty, so that's part of it. And so to say, do I want to be just an average person in the big pond, or do I find a smaller pond where I can perhaps move things along for other people better, faster, so, and help them do it as well.
Mm-hmm. What's your intentions with the crafts that you have harnessed? Even though you may be a little bit doubtful or question some of the ones that you've developed, but I see very evidently and very clearly and truly honor and respect for all that you have done. What is the intentions in highlighting on a deeper level the individuals, the culture of Vietnam and beyond? Can you share if there's a deeper layer of that? I know you've shared some of the pieces already.
We're talking about turning our short documentary into a full-length movie. And again, highlighting some of the people. And I can't grasp yet what the story there will be. And so what you're raising is, I'd say it raises some doubts in my own mind. How much more can I make of this experience that I've been fortunate to have? And you're raising the question, what else do you want to do with it? And I don't know. I've found that often opportunities show up and I take advantage of them. In the case of the Vietnam Project, in the case of a lot of different academic things, somebody has come to me and said, somebody needs to look at this in my organization. Would you come study it? So I've responded to opportunities for the most part. Probably 15 years or so ago, I said, I'm not going to respond only. If a student asks a question, that becomes a research topic. I'm going to go out and find what I want to study. And so I did that. And then I've been willing to be open to some of these other things that have come up, like writing this particular book and doing the documentary. So I don't know what my intentions are going forward. Certainly, I think it's not very deep in a way, but I just want to learn how to write in a different way. That would be my intention for the next few years. And I've said this year is sort of the make or break year. I'm putting everything I can into learning how to write fiction. And if it doesn't work out, does that mean I quit? We're getting close to the end of the year and I've about decided, no, I don't think I'll quit, because it takes longer than a year and a half, 2 years to really learn how to do something. So yeah, but I have to say, I don't know what I intend to do going forward. I'm sorry.
And there's no apology needed.
Yeah.
If anything, it's an opportunity of allowing, which is what we talked about right at the beginning of the conversation, to allow that wisdom and allow that unknowing and serendipitous opportunities to unfold. So
Yeah.
I'm excited and curious for you of how this is going to unfold.
I am too. I have thought about, and I dabble on how do you blend photography and writing. And so that's something that I think, okay, 5 years from now, that would be the next wave to really get into, if I figured out how to do the fiction writing and blend that into my teaching world. I used about a month ago, we had a session and I used a book called Literature and Leadership, which is based on some lectures that a Stanford professor did long time ago. And he used Don Quixote and Othello and different well-known pieces of literature to pull out aspects of leadership, which I've done over the years, but not as systematically as he did. And the last chapter in the book is called Poetry and Plumbing. It's about, there are times in leadership when it truly is an art, and then there are other things that you just have to have and do well. And I just got the evaluations from the participants, and one of them said, I've never thought about poetry with leadership. And I thought, that's what I want. I want somebody to say, oh, I've never thought about it that way, or, oh, that's a question that I haven't encountered. So that would be my intention, is to continue to try and poke people a little bit to say, poetry, does that really go with leadership? Of course it does.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sort of thing is in the teaching world, that's where I am. I think I'll go. And then we'll see, as we're just saying, we'll see what might come up. I'm just trying to be as open as I can right now.
Yeah, I love that. And in an interesting way, perhaps your life and the career that you have built have been stark contrasts of each other. From the concrete of the academic world and the sure thing, if you will, of the world that you live in America, be it the unsettling and undefined and unstructured environment of Vietnam, in building that. So the contrasts are perhaps what thrives and what builds you and what puts you in a place of, okay, this is contrasting enough, and this is as opposite as it could potentially be, and I want to bridge the two together. I mean, you alluded to it already, also in terms of wanting to learn tennis, which is, you're not a sports person. You've said that a number of times in the conversation. So is that what humanity and as human beings we ultimately crave? And it is contrast and being able to relate to it. Yeah,
I think so. And I need structure for sure, but you're right. So Vietnam is a great example of ambiguity. Things always go wrong. There's never any set pattern. It's changing, but it's usually ambiguous and vague and a lot of white space. Some of my life, I want to be very structured. Years ago, my dad was an Army officer for 20 years, and then he retired and became a professor. And I said one day, you wore a uniform for 20 years in the Army. Now you're a professor, and every day when you go to work, you wear a white shirt, gray slacks, brown belt. Yes. And I said, basically, you're wearing a uniform. And he said, well, that frees up my mind to think about other things. And I love that. And so that notion of have some structure in some places so you don't have to think about it is great. Right. So yes, I think you're right. The contrast, maybe not everybody needs it, but even in his world, he needed that structure so that he could think differently and bigger thoughts and all that. And so that surprise, in a sense, of I can be super structured. And the theater director said this when I was first studying them. He said, we have to have structure so we can be creative inside of it. And so we know exactly when this play goes on. You can't change the date. Software can delay a release, but a play, a sporting event, that has to happen. And that's the structure. And then inside of it, it's much, much freer. So I think you're right. The nice thing is they don't have to compete, right? You can live with both. You need both, as you're saying, and it makes life much fuller. So to have that, some things that are structured and don't have to worry about, and then go crazy on the other ones.
Absolutely. I love that. I could talk to you for at least another hour, Nancy. I've really enriched and loved this conversation, and truly grateful for you sharing your experiences, your knowledge, your insight, and all the wisdom that you've gained through your life travels back and forth and everywhere in between. So thank you so much.
So very kind. Thank you very much. It's been delightful and yeah, absolutely wonderful. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm Naranjan, and you've been listening to Master of Your Crafts podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and join me next week for another episode. Thank you for listening.